Hello, everyone, and welcome to Walking Through the Bible. We have now come to the 18th and final lesson in our study of the book of Esther. If you have missed any of these lessons and would like to rewatch this series, you can find them all at eastendchurch.org by searching under the media pull-down menu for the WTTB English podcast link. So having now completed our verse-by-verse study of Esther, it is a good time to reflect upon what we have learned. Esther is the 17th book of the Old Testament and is the last of the 12 books that began with Joshua that primarily deal with the national history of Israel. This means that upon completion of this book, we will have now completed 2 of the 5 sections of the Old Testament, with the first being the books of the law, Genesis through Deuteronomy. Like the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, Esther belongs to the post-exilic period of Israel's history. However, unlike Ezra and Nehemiah, does not take place within the boundaries of Judea or Israel for that matter. Instead, it takes place within the Achaemenid city of Susa, the same city where Nehemiah would later have said to be serving as the king's cupbearer. It begins with a drunken feast thrown by the king of Persia, Ahasuerus. In the series, we determined that Ahasuerus in the book of Esther was Xerxes I of Persia, who ruled from 486 BC to 465 BC, with the events of this book taking place between 483 and 474 BC. If you want a more detailed look at how we made these determinations, we suggest you go back to watch Lesson 2 of this series. At the drunken feast, though, Ahasuerus called his wife, Queen Vashti, to come and basically act like a stripper for his guests, a request that she refused. This angered Ahasuerus so much that he signed a decree that would demote Vashti from being queen and commanded all women in the empire to basically respect their husbands and do what they say. Now, of course, the wife is called in the Bible to respect her husband as head of the household, but if her husband asks her or commands her to do something sinful, she must obey God rather than man. In that case, her husband would be sinning in using his position as head of the house to defy the commandments of God, so it would be him who is sinning, not her. Getting back to Esther, a special feature of the laws of the Medes and Persians was the fact that whatever laws were made couldn't be altered once signed by the king. Not even the king could break them. That's because they viewed the king as a deity-like figure, and thus the laws that he made were so perfect that nobody could change or improve upon them. It is this feature that Ahasuerus would later come to regret twice in this book. The first had to do with his wife Vashti, for later when he was sober, he knew he had made a mistake in demoting her, but there was nothing he could do without damaging the whole backbone that the government was founded on. So it was decided that a search be made for a new queen. Young, beautiful virgins were to be brought to the king's house. They were to be given time to purify and beautify themselves, something that took a year, after which they would get one night to spend in the king's bed. If he was well pleased with her, she would become queen. Otherwise, she would be added to his harem and would be called upon when the king desired. That's where Esther, a young Jewish woman, came in. She had been chosen by the king's servants to come into the king's house, an order that she couldn't really refuse. Her uncle Mordecai, a man who had raised her ever since both her parents died, told her to go, but not to reveal his family or lineage, because that would open her up to persecution. In the king's house, Esther was well liked by the king's servants, and when it came to be her night with the king, she pleased him very well and was made queen of Persia. Meanwhile, Ahasuerus had raised up a man named Haman to be his prime minister. Haman was an evil man, one who was arrogant and demanded respect. People would often bow down to him while in his presence, something that Mordecai would not do. When word got back to Haman about this, he would convince Ahasuerus that all Jews were rebellious and deserved to be annihilated. So Ahasuerus signed the edict. Remember, edicts are unchangeable, that in a year's time, and for one day only, people were allowed to take up arms to kill all the Jews. Of course, this news traveled fast, and the Jews went into mourning, including Mordecai. But Mordecai did have someone in the palace that could help: Esther. At first, Esther was reluctant, for she would be risking her own life, but Mordecai told her that inaction wouldn't save her life. for she would die with her people if she did nothing. He told her that he was confident that the Jews would be saved from Haman, but perhaps this was the reason she was made queen, for the very reason to have the ear of the king so that the Jews would be spared. Esther did take up the cause, and after prayer and fasting and 2 banquets, Esther finally revealed that an evil plot was afoot to kill her people, something that was unjust. When Ahasuerus asked who devised such a plan, Haman was identified. The king realized he had been fooled again, and so when he came back into the room, he saw Haman pleading with Esther for his life, but mistook that as Haman making a pass at his wife. So he had Haman executed in the gallows that ironically had been made by Haman for Mordecai. But what to do about the edict? It could not be changed. However, a new edict could be made that would allow the Jews to defend themselves, something that they did successfully. To commemorate this great victory, the Feast of Purim was created. This is not one of the feasts of the Lord, like the Passover or the Feast of Tabernacles, but it was a Jewish civic holiday that is still celebrated by Jews up to this day. As for the author, that fact is unknown to us, though some consider Mordecai, Esther's cousin, the author. And while this is entirely possible, the fact remains that we just don't know, so it's really useless to speculate much on it. It does show signs of inspiration, though, along with the other books of the Bible, and so we know that God is the ultimate author of the book. With difficulty knowing the author, the date it was written also cannot be entirely determined. However, due to the dating of the events of the book to the reign of Xerxes I, the writing of the book would be after those events, making the likely writing of the book between 450 and 400 BC. Doctrinally, the book of Esther teaches us that God provides for and cares for his people, even in the face of almost certain destruction and seemingly irreversible circumstances. In this instance, God used an unlikely hero, Esther, a young Jewish girl who rose to become queen of the Achaemenid Empire, showing us that God does not always use the people we might expect, the rich and powerful, to accomplish his purpose. Does God still work this way in the world today? Almost certainly. We just don't have any newly revealed scripture that could definitively say that God did this or did not do this. So we must always walk by faith, and like Mordecai did, say perhaps God did this or that, knowing that whatever God's will is, it will be done. The book also teaches us an important lesson about standing for truth and righteousness, even when doing so might endanger our life. In the days of Esther, one didn't just go before the king uninvited, not even the queen. Esther put her life in danger in order to save her people, but she did so with faith in God, and God used her and her faith to save the Jews. And finally, the book of Esther teaches us the importance of humility as seen through the demise of the evil Haman. And so with that, we conclude our study of the book of Esther. The Lord willing, in the next lesson, we will remain in the Old Testament and begin our study of the book of Job with an introduction to that book. We hope that you will join us for that discussion as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
We thank you for watching Walking Through the Bible today. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. But if you like this video, we ask that you consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss out on other videos in our series, as well as share this video among your friends so that the saving message of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.